Right, so I said in my last video that I'll be covering the most important cult ability of all, which is of course Cult Ambush. But it's just a very complex topic, and I think it's going to be best if I demonstrate a lot of the tactics and specifics with some on-the-board footage and examples. So bear with me until I get all of that done properly. I really want to be able to show players physically how to do it rather than just giving them the theory. So instead this week I'm going to take a bit of a departure from my typical Genestealer Cults strategies and do some outside of the box thinking. You see, in the last 10 or so games that I've played, I've been exploring the concept of allying in friendly detachments of Tyranids or Astra Militarum who come as brood brothers to fulfill critical roles in my army list. Now let's be honest, the Cult Codex has some huge weaknesses right now, so being able to draw on these other two factions to level the playing field is a massive advantage that, to be honest, I probably used to overlook it and think of it as a bit of a bonus gimmick. So let's kick off by looking at a typical Genestealer Cult list and identifying the problems we want to try and fix. If you watch my other videos, you should have a pretty good idea of what I'm going to list here. So, number one, durability. This is the big one. Genestealer Cult is struggling so much in competitive play right now because we are so easy to kill. If a Space Marine so much as farts on the other end of the board, we'll probably lose half a squad of neophytes. This is really punishing, especially for newbie players who are going to be asking themselves, am I really that shit? Or did I just waste a lot of money on a load of shit? As I've said before, there's ways to play the faction that keep you alive, but it's very challenging, and sometimes depending on the matchup, even your clever tricks and stuff won't stop your men from being minced. We've got no units that can sit on an objective and get shot at and reliably stay alive to secure as those primary points. Number two, I'd say range damage. The Cult's current arsenal of long-range weapons is just a bit pants, to be honest. The only real options are mining lasers and the twin autocannons. You know, sure, the autocannons are kind of like a trusty old tool. They'll do some wounds, but if you really want to do some actual damage, the mining laser just doesn't cut it. The D6 damage is too unreliable, and our units themselves suffer from a poor 4+ ballistic skill. Unless you base your whole army design around boosting it through your creeds and your warlord traits and the Jackal Alphas, it's just not good enough. And three, I'd say scoring secondary objectives. Now, this is a tricky one, because technically speaking, there's quite a lot of secondaries that rely upon infantry actions, which Cults should be ideally suited for. Even more so, there's a lot of objectives that benefit from having cheap deep strike infantry. So objectives that you need to pop up in the opponent's deployment zone to do it. However, I see the problem as this. In a standard battalion detachment, all of the 6 troop slots are taken up by squads that I consider as busy. And by that I mean I need them to be doing stuff already. They don't have time to waste doing objectives. Like my acolytes, they're all carrying rock drills and stuff designed to be killing the enemy, not sitting around on a backfield objective raising a flag. Same goes for my neophytes. They're in my list to be protecting the Patriarch, following him around wherever he goes and just, defending him using unquestioning loyalty. We really need our troop slots for critical combat roles and pushing the midfield. Scoring secondaries is, in my mind, often just a thing I consider as a bonus if I can win the primary board control game and, have some guys spare. Now, we've outlined all of the 3 main weaknesses, all the holes we need to plug. And in all cases, we're going to be looking at the theory of paying for a patrol detachment of either Tyranids or Astra Militarum, which will be 2 CP at the start of the game. As you most likely know, a patrol detachment gives you the ability to bring 2 of each unit type. So that's a max of 2 HQs, 2 troops, 2 elites, 2 heavy support. You have to have 1 HQ and you have to have 1 troops. Now, the good news is that being descendants of the hive mind, Tyranids are actually pretty strong right now and have a huge array of decent units. Also, by bringing in a patrol, they get to keep their hive fleet trait. So Kraken, Kronos, Behemoth, whatever, that's great. You get to keep that ability. Just bear in mind now, however, that is not true for when you ally in Astra Militarum. They lose their regiment abilities when they become brood brothers. So we can't access any special abilities like Cadians rerolling 1s. You don't get +1, Catachan strength or anything like that. Instead, when you become a brood brother, you simply add 1 to the leadership and it grants them the unquestioning loyalty rule. So let's look at what Tyranids can offer us first. Our core Genestealer Cult army is already going to be pretty fast, pretty mobile, and hard hitting if we can get it into melee. So here I'll be looking at filling the gap in the shooting capability. There's a handful of big bugs here that are absolutely sick at dealing serious damage. So we'll be choosing the Kronos Hive Fleet, which is the one most suited to ballistics. Quite simply, they get to reroll ones to hit if they don't move, just like Cadians do. As you'll see, this is going to be absolutely fine because they'll be stationary most of the game anyway. So the classic lineup I'm going to promote begins with a gang of Hive Guard. You can max them out to a squad size of 6, and I would fully recommend going max there. You're going to be casting psychic powers on them and spending CP to boost their shooting, so you want the most models to benefit from those buffs. You could go crazy here and have 2 squads of Hive Guard, but I think 1 is just fine. At the time I'm going to press, a squad of 6 clocks in at 270 points, I think. Now, if you haven't heard about how good Hive Guard are, then let me bring you up to speed. First of all, the weapons ignore line of sight. They're basically mortars. So you can sit these guys at the back of the board behind ruins where their 36-inch range impaler cannons can arc over and reach almost anything the opponent's got without ever revealing themselves to any return fire. The next best part is that these guns ignore cover saves too. So that makes them doubly effective at dealing with those annoying units that are camping at the back, sitting in a building or in a crater or something, holding a flag maybe. They get 2 shots each at strength 8 and D3 damage. So that's 12 shots for a 6-man gang, who most importantly have a 3+ ballistic skill, and they'll be rerolling the ones as Kronos. However, there's going to be some symbol combos you can stack up here to make sure you really put these guys into overkill mode. So next up, you're going to want to bring along a Neurothrope in the patrol. He's going to be your HQ choice. So he's a dedicated psychic character. He clocks in about 95 points, I think. It's basically like a floating brain, and you'll be wanting to sit him right next to the Hive Guard to babysit them. You see, Tyranids have this rule called instinctive behavior, which means that they need a leadership unit within 24 inches. And if not, then they're going to be subtracting 1 from the hit rolls unless they target the closest thing to them. I mean, 24 inches is pretty far, to be honest, but you want to keep him alive anyway by making him untargetable using Lookout Sir, hidden next to the Hive Guard guys. Now, what we're going to do is assign the Kronos special psychic power to the big floating brain Neurothrope, which is called Symbiostorm. I think I said that right anyway. It's a Warp Charge 6 cast, which is fairly easily, especially considering the Neurothrope can reroll any 1s in psychic tests it takes. So it's almost impossible to get a double 1 Perils of the Warp there. This power is going to go straight onto the Hive Guard and means that any hit rolls of 6 give us another additional shot. That just means that you'll be able to ramp up the amount of hits you can make. However, that's just phase 1. Next, you can activate a 2 CP stratagem called Single-Minded Annihilation. This straight up gives your Hive Guard the ability to do their shooting twice. So if you've already cast Symbiostorm on them, you're going to be seeing maximum return for your points and CP spent, doing all that beefy shooting all over again. So, that's like 24 shots, ignoring line of sight, ignoring cover saves, with exploding 6s and D3 damage. So obviously that's fucking great. Enemy players will know that they've got to deal with the Hive Guard at the back, and it can be problematic, especially if they're slow moving. You're going to be well out of the way, and you're going to have other stuff that you're throwing at them to keep them busy. Now, there's some other stuff you can do here to fill out your little patrol detachment. Naturally, if we go Kronos, there's other key shooting units that will feel right at home here in this patrol. So first up, I'd say the Exocrine. He's 170 points. He's a big toughness 8 monster with a bioplasmic cannon sticking out of his back. This thing gets 6 shots a turn, but if you don't move, then he gets to fire twice, so that's 12 shots. Of course, if a Kronos, we'll be probably trying to sit still with him anyway, so he can reroll 1s, so it's all good. His range is 36 inches too, so he can reach most key targets without needing to move up first. And if you do want to move him, perhaps to keep him out of sight, turn 1, to prevent him from being blown off the table, then you can pay a 1 CP stratagem called Symbiotic Devastation, which means that you can move the Exocrine but treat him as if he stayed still for the purpose of shooting attacks. Now, a little thing that I overlooked here originally. The Exocrine starts on a ballistic skill of 4+, but if he stands still, he gets to add 1 to hit rolls because of an ability called Symbiotic Targeting. So basically, he'll be hitting on 3s most of the time, but if you cast Symbiostorm on him instead of the Hive Guard, it synergizes very nicely with the exploding 6s to hit, because now you're adding 1 to the hit roll. So any 5s become 6s, and then all of those are going to be granting you another load of extra shots. So, I mean, here you have to weigh up which unit is going to get you the most damage, and depends on what you're shooting at. I'd still probably cast it on the Hive Guard because of the shoot twice stratagem and their ignoring line of sight ability. The only real downside of them is that their damage is D3, and that could be a bit swingy. You could roll a bunch of ones there, and then it's just gutting. If you're using the X-Screen, he's flat 2 damage, so, that's always a big plus. There's another heavy support model I'd also consider here, which is the Tyranid. By default, it's equipped with a big acid spray flamethrower weapon, but I feel like that's not really making the most of our Kronos perks. Instead, I like to take him with the Flesh Borer Hive. This is kind of like the Tyranid's version of a Punisher Cannon Lehman Russ. So 20 shots at strength 5, but like the X-Screen, he can also fire twice if he stands still. So that's 40 shots. You cast Symbiote Storm on him instead. Again, that's a lot of 6s you're probably going to get for loads of extra hits. Now, here's one thing I'd consider. Totally depending on your opponents, on what models are in front of you on the board. I love high rate of fire, 1 damage guns like this because it just doesn't care about invuln saves. It doesn't care about damage reduction from Death Guard. It's just a straight up number of shots. However, there is a stratagem you can pop that makes it go into overdrive mode. It's 2 CP and it's called Pathogenic Slime. It increases the damage of your shooting weapons by 1. So now you could have a monster doing 40 shots at 2 damage each. Space Marines, they'll shit their pants when that starts going off. You can also pop this on the Exocrine and up his Bioplasmic Cannon to flat 3 damage per shot. If you're fighting Gravis Armor Marines, Custodes, stuff with 3 wounds like that, I'd say that's a very good idea because every single shot that goes through will drop a model. Now, those will be my key picks personally. Let's keep in mind, however, that you must have at least 1 troops picking your patrol, so a lot of people will look at the cheapest option, which is the Ripper Swarm. These little gribblers are great. They're like 36 points or something. They can deep strike, pop up anywhere and help you grab objectives at the backfield. I will say this, however, they are very flawed in that they are not infantry. They're a swarm. So you can't use them to do those key secondary objectives like raise the banners, deploy scramblers, whatever. Which is really what I would be aiming to do with them. So you could also fill in with some termagants instead, either a basic bitch 10-man squad just to do some low-level shit, hold an objective or whatever, or you could go super ham and do a 30-bug squad with Devourers and actually get some damage dealing from them. Remember, 30 termagants with Devourers will get you the equivalent of 90 bolt gun shots, re-rolling wounds of 1. That's fucking mental. And you can always put the 2 CP stratagem on them to fire again instead of on the Hive Guard. So that's, 180 bolt gun shots. Lastly, a few other options that make sense to me. You could take a Lictor, very cheap again at 37 points for another deep strikeable infantry unit that could pop up and do the secondary objective stuff. There's also the Kronos Special Stratagem, the Deepest Shadow. You can pop it, and when an enemy rolls for a psychic test, it basically means they only get to roll 1 dice. So that's hugely advantageous if they're relying on something special to go off for their battle plan. Finally, the Demacaron, however the fuck you say it. Granted, he's not specifically suited to Kronos, but I don't think it even matters much with him. This big fucker is absolutely awesome currently. Loads of people are using him. If you want to fill the durability gap in your army, this will probably be my pick. It's such a huge model for only 230 points. Your opponent doesn't get a choice. They've got to deal with it. Let's look at the stats. It's 12-inch movement. He can ignore terrain. He just moves and leaps over it, so you can hide him easily. 6 D3 plus 3 damage talent attacks, 5 plus invuln save, 18 wounds, and a special rule that lets him do D6 mortal wounds after fighting, and if he gets that off, it lets him get a 5 plus feel no pain for the rest of the game. This is just the sort of model that I would charge directly into an enemy unit that you're worried about and just let it duel with them for as long as possible. Keep them busy while your Genestealer Cult boys run around doing the business under cover fire from Hive Guard at the back. Just to show you anyway how I design all this for my army at home, since I want my cult army to look in sync and entirely mechanized rather than a strange mix of cult and bugs. So I dived into the Adeptus Mechanicus catalogue and picked out some similar size units to convert. First up being my Hive Guard. For these, I chose the Castellan robots. I know they're a little bit taller, but they can fit onto the same base size. Instead of being robots, I made them like mechanized suits. So they're going to be piloted by Acolyte hybrids. I really love how these turned out. I can't wait to use them on the table. For the X-Creen or the Tyranid, I chose the crab-like Doomcrawler, since it's again sort of similar in size. The Bioplasmic Cannon or the Flesh Borer Hive of these big bugs will be represented by the large laser on the crawler. And I haven't had a chance to finish it yet, but my Neurothroat will be represented by some kind of cult psyker, but mounted on a kind of mechanical crab suit. So I'm going to build this from the tripod legs of the Necron Hexmark Destroyer, who is basically just a rip-off of the Kelermorph anyway, let's face it. I'll let you see all this when it's done, as I'm really excited to make it and finish off the group. Originally, my Hive Guard were going to be represented by Genestealer Cult Ogrin, converted to carry the Impaler cannons. I got 3 of these done, and whilst they look pretty funky and quirky, I much prefer the mech suits. I'm not sure if I'm going to work on like a Termagant or Ripper Swarm conversion yet. I'm not sure how I'd do that anyway, but I'll think of something. But anyway, back to the tactics. So there's a lot of good options and some insanely cool tools for giving our cult army the support it needs from Tyranids. So let's swap over now and go to the Astra Militarum side. Now, the funny thing is that a lot of the best picks here don't actually benefit from their own faction's regimental traits anyway, kind of like how Patriarch, our Genestealers, Goliath trucks, etc. are exempt from the cult creeds. The Guard may be known for their classic gunline setups, but that's not what I'm going to suggest today. If you want ballistic support, choose the Tyranid stuff. And that does sound really weird, doesn't it? It's totally backwards, but, fuck it. We're going to look at the Guard mainly for a source of durability and secondary objective securing. Therefore, my first selection will, of course, be the Bullgrins. Unless you've been living under a rock for the last 4 years, you should know that these football hooligans in plate armor are absolutely hench. And some nut job at Games Workshop actually decided they need to come down in points. But, we're not complaining. So you can fill up a squad of 9 for just over 300 points, and believe me, they're worth every penny. You split the squad half with brute shields, half with slab shields, and these bastards will take a pounding. So the brute shields give them an invuln save, and the slab shield give them a 2+ standard save. My mindset here would be, I want the enemy to focus everything they have on them to give my cult assault squads the best chance of staying alive and doing the critical stuff elsewhere. So I'd get these guys rushing up the board, taking the key primary objectives in the middle, and then just sit them to hold out and score those primary points. If the enemy decides to take the bait and try to get into a brawl with them, that's when the fun starts. As a second pick, I'd bring along a Ministorum Priest. He can run forwards with the Bullgrin and give them all +1 attack. So on the charge, a 9-man squad can get up to 46 attacks. They'll mash shit up and they'll take a lot of punches back. It's the one thing that Cult can't do. Now, to fill out the HQ choice for your Guard Patrol, you could go one of 2 ways. Option 1, take a Primaris Psyker. Personally, I'm not a huge fan, but it does give you yet another source of smite, and you can cast either Night Shroud or Psychic Barrier on the Bullgrin. So that's a -1 to hit or a +1 to saves, and that does affect invuln saves. It can make them really stubborn. So option 2, bring a Lord Commissar. They're cheap, and it just gives you another surprisingly fighty character who can hide amongst the Bullgrin and then jump forwards with a Power Fist or something to smash a few faces in. So, that kind of covers the durability issue. In terms of shooting, I really wouldn't go down this route. Guard are kind of good, but they rely on quantity and also their regimental buffs, which are really important for a lot of those big guns. So I'm going to ignore all this stuff like Lehman Russ tank commanders, Manticores, demolisher cannons and so forth. However, there is one thing. Much like the Bullgrin, the Commissar and the Priest before, the Guard's air support does not benefit from regiment traits, so I'd consider a Vulture gunship here to be a nice idea. These things just fucking shred. That's 40 Punisher cannon shots. Definitely worth it for that unique ability to just get behind the enemy in one move and pick off tricky units that are hiding at the back. Your opponent can't tie them up in combat, and you can also use their base size to block important pathways through the map. It's very useful. Now, let's focus on the other thing, which was secondary objective grabbing. For this, we're going to be using Scions. Now, I'm a big fan of the Militarum Tempestus. They're my second army at home, but to be fair, they don't really get much play currently as I'm so focused on Cult. Now, in a patrol, you could get 2 5-man squads for 45 points each. The squad leader can take a free plasma pistol at the moment, but I won't bother grabbing the other special weapons. These lads are simply here to score those secondaries. Just drop them in, deploy scramblers or whatever it is you want to do, and then your main combat troops have free reign to do the fighting. Anything they can achieve after that point is a bonus. Modelling wise, it's pretty easy to convert this stuff for Cult. Sounds, they could just need a head swap, but you can do so much more depending on how far you want to push it. Bullgrin, again, they can just be painted in a more Xenos colour scheme, and I typically file off all the Imperium Eagles everywhere and just replace them with the Cult iconography. Maybe swap out the maces for something more culty. You know, you could have stuff taken from the Aberrant kit or something. You know, it's something I really need to finish off because I've only done 5 at the moment. I want a big squad of 9. Now, personally, having tried out these ideas recently, I think the Hive Guard are the main performers here and undoubtedly worth the points. However, I'm going to be trying out a list that incorporates both patrol detachments, Tyranids and Guard, to see if that proves to be a real winner. It is surely a hefty CP investment before the game has already begun, but you got to look at it this way. It's 3 CP just to use Perfect Ambush. So if you don't use that stratagem in the game, which most people usually do at least once, then it's all good. My list I'm working on right now is as follows. So your main GSC detachment, Twisted Helix of course, with a Patriarch, a Magus and a Primus. 3 Acolyte hybrid gangs, 10 men apiece with hand flamers, and then either 4 rock drills or 4 rock swords. 10 neophytes who are going to be running up the board, being meat shields for the Patriarch, and then 2 Goliath trucks to start off some of the Acolytes in. Then comes the Kronos Patrol, 6 Hive Guard, a Neurothrope, and 10 basic Termagants. Then the Astra Militarum Patrol with 9 Bulgrin, 2 small Scion squads, a Ministorum Priest, and a Primaris Psyker. So that all clocks in exactly at 2,000 points and gives you an army that can do serious work in every aspect of the battle and contains units dedicated to scoring you secondary objectives. Anyway, last of all, I want to give a big thank you to anyone who shared my content or given it a shout out on forums or Discord, etc. It means a lot to me that people are learning stuff about the faction and the game in general. Personally, I was really looking forward to getting some tournaments this summer, but it looks like all of the local ones instantly sold out and I can't go to some of the London ones because of the dates. So for now, it looks like I'll be sticking to online tournaments and friendly games in person when lockdown ends. Anyway, keep the comments coming and I promise my next videos will have some more detailed board demonstrations. So see you soon.